your host, Frederic Joye, and today we're talking about the second part of our three-part series of podcasts regarding fixed price projects versus open-ended contracts. In this second episode, we'll talk about fixed price projects and the risks and benefits associated with them. So in the first episode, we talked about the initial steps of a fixed price project, the estimation. We shed light on the risk of delegating project estimation by way of quotations or free appraisals, and discovering if a lack of commitment to detail will come at a cost versus paying to uncover the detail. So if you haven't listened to it yet, I would recommend you do and add it to your playlist. In this episode, we will explore the hidden cost in project success and why fixed price locks you into something you cannot change and will live until your next project. And just like in the first episode, joining me on this podcast series is Nigel Gorham, an experienced technologist based in Sydney who currently works in the ad tech sector, but also worked for many years in custom software development project and product development. So Nigel's run many software projects, some as the service provider and some as the client. So his perspective is based on a working knowledge of what's at stake in the client-supplier engagement, from managing expectations and budgets to requirements gathering, estimation, project management, and product development and delivery. And I'm happy to have Nigel on the show again today for this new project. So welcome, Nigel.
Hey, Fred. It's nice to be here.
And lastly, to give you a head up, we'll try to use again the format of what I call the 3-minute drill. So one of us will ask a question and the other one will have 3 minutes to answer as comprehensively as possible. But I think in this episode we'll have a pretty thorough question. So we'll try our best, and if we need a more detailed response, we'll just go beyond the 3 minutes. So we're going to kick off today's topic, which is fixed price projects, why disappointment is inevitable. So, Nigel, tell us about your experience running fixed cost projects. But first, maybe could you explain what a fixed cost project is?
Sure. Okay. The first bit's going to be really easy. The second bit's going to take a little bit of time.
So you'll have 2 times 2
yeah,
minutes.
Yeah. So, okay. So if I just assume that the audience doesn't know anything about what a fixed price contract is. As the name suggests, a fixed cost software project is a project where the client enters into a contract with a supplier for a fixed cost in return for, features and capabilities that they specify and which both parties agree to. So the sort of agreement is usually handled in a 2-document format, and this will be different in different markets. People have different names for these things, but typically you'll have a contractor agreement, and that deals with the legal obligations for both parties. And then accompanying that is a statement of works, which is a list of all the features and capabilities that must be delivered for the cost that's outlined in the contract. Now, like I said, these are referred to differently in different markets, but essentially the one thing that they have in common is the deliverable, the output of the project, and that has to meet a detailed, the detailed description that's actually contained in the requirements. So, as you can imagine, that puts an enormous amount of pressure on the requirements being very detailed, and especially for the developers, that the descriptions are unambiguous, so that the supplier can basically build the deliverable and be sure that nothing is left to interpretation, right? So that's what a fixed price contract is. Then you asked me what my experience was, and I've had to negotiate and run many fixed price contracts over the years, and that's been across everything from mobile apps to embedded device applications through to cloud-based systems and so on. So quite a diverse range of projects. And while I'm very happy to say that the majority of them ran on time and to budget, what's missing from that picture are perhaps the compromises or the disappointments that were felt on both sides. So, there's always this natural tension that exists between needing flexibility at particular times through the project, and how that's a tension that works against the fact that you're working to these very rigid requirements and a rigid time frame and a rigid budget and so on. So how that might play out is that say the developers, it's going to be expected, and you would know this, Fred, to be true of your own teams. The developers have to remain flexible in their thinking because they're having to deal with unforeseen complexities during the project, how you solve a problem, etc. But then on the flip side, you may also have clients realizing that, even after the development has begun and the feature has been developed, they actually realize that their original description of the requirement for implementation was just not really adequate. It was not what it should have been. And so therefore, it leaves them in a difficult position because there's going to be no opportunity to review that until maybe another round of dev or next phase of, in the project. That's what the project is, and that's the experience that I have.
So thank you. And so you mentioned that the clients realizing that their proposed features are not really the best fit. There's always this idea of like the initial expectations, and then when they actually see the right thing is maybe not what they wanted, but they didn't really know because they haven't tested the thing before. They didn't really, they didn't know. So what kind of expectations usually did the clients have, and do you think some of them could have been run differently or more efficiently without that fixed constraints? So I mean the projects, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it is client expectations raises very interesting questions because I think when people talk about expectations, they unconsciously believe that some things are fixed and other things are flexible, even when you're talking about within the constraints of a fixed price contract. So kind of like you're expecting, kind of like you and I, if we're out in a public space, we have certain expectations on how people will behave and treat each other, but culturally, there can be a different level of expectation. And the same thing sort of applies to these projects. So as you can imagine, it creates these grey areas. But the fact of the matter is that fixed price contracts manage expectations in a very clinical way. So once the contract is entered into, then the deliverable becomes the main concern. And each party has to protect themselves and focus on delivering according to the contract. Now that might sound kind of crazy and selfish, but the reality is it's the only way that you can stop things like scope creep and endless revision cycles, which are both costly to the client and costly to the supplier. So for me, when I think about the expectations of clients, there are actually two groups of expectations. The first group fall into what's actually in the expectations that are captured in the contract itself, and then the expectations that fall outside the contract. So things that fall inside the contract, what about the features and capabilities that are requested, right? A project cost that won't be exceeded, maybe a set deliverable date, an agreement that you and I would both act professionally towards each other. And if I summarize all that in a fixed price contract, clients are often looking for, and you use the phrase, I'm pretty sure, like a turnkey solution, right?
Right, yes.
Yeah. So, but the interesting thing is that those are the expectations that fall within the contract, and then clients have expectations that fall outside of what's in the contract. And
So
so,
tell me about that.
yeah. These are the curly ones, and I think every provider and supplier really hates these. But people are only human, and
Yeah.
we naturally think in very flexible ways, but contracts aren't always very flexible things. So for many clients, I think they would summarize, you could summarize an expectation that's not in the contract is this expectation of immunity. I call it immunity because it's kind of like a protection that they have from the laws of cause and effect. In other words, I can do this, but it won't affect that, It's a comfortable kind of amnesia that they have to the constraints that they signed off on. They tell themselves that the fixed price contract means that because it's fixed price, when something happens, the supplier and the provider will fix the problem or handle it all from their side, which means I won't have to go back internally and discuss those issues with the stakeholders within the project. I won't need to talk about cost. I won't
Well,
need to.
that's when the provider is actually telling them about the problem,
Mm.
uh, which is not
Not always
always
the
the
case.
case.
Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right. So then, another area of expectation that clients have that falls outside is their expectation to make modifications or variations on the original agreed to requirements, even once the implementation has begun. They maybe it's a lack of experience or a lack of domain knowledge, but they almost perceive like software development as being just as fluid and flexible as lots of other business disciplines. And so they don't realize what are the run-on implications, caused to a project if they change their mind once things begin. So that just means, additional rounds of development testing will have to follow, and they come at some sort of further cost.
Yeah, that's right. Another way to look at it from a provider's perspective, to explain to the client, to actually mitigate maybe the frustration of the client when this happens, because sorry to interrupt, but here that's when it kind of like, because of these expectations, you start to have this the relationship that is souring, because like the client is asking for more stuff, and the company says, well, but that wasn't what you asked us, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so if we have to do this, then that's what you have to pay. But there's one solution that we could use here, is to say, okay, then you have to give up something else of the same value of
yeah,
estimation,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
so you don't get that, but then you could get this instead at the same cost,
yeah.
right?
So, and this is exactly where the trade-offs exist. So um, even with those trade-offs that can exist within that fixed budget, it'll be like you say, a feature or development, like the delivery will have to push out, or here's another one, and this is a big cost area around expectation, is that uh, when you think about running a project, you're thinking about all the communication points. You're thinking about being able to share, have meetings, do
Mhm.
team meetings, review points, summarize that information, share it, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, the communication is critical to making the project work. Um, but some clients have an expectation that because they've signed a contract that says they'll pay money for your services, that they can get you anytime they like, anytime they need to, anytime there's something for discussion. And the reality is that most suppliers and providers, they can't do that all the time. They can
Yeah,
they can make best efforts, but they've also budgeted in, um, to their fixed
absolutely.
price contract, a set number of hours and a set number of review points, and they need to manage their internal schedules accordingly. How they coordinate resources, teams, even things like resource rooms, places where there's computers and facilities and
Yeah.
infrastructure to support that. So So it's interesting talking about the expectations because there's always what's in the contract and there's what's outside the contract, um, and it's a very it's going to be negotiated on every single project,
Right.
but it really comes down to the attitude that both sides bring.
Be edited.
So with all those things in mind, you asked, do I think that some of those client projects could have been run differently and more efficiently without the
Yeah.
fixed constraint?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key question to be asking. And the answer is absolutely yes. The best fixed price projects I ever ran were they were with clients who were very experienced software professionals. They had decades of experience running software projects, and they were not only very well prepared, they had contingencies in the budgets, they had contingencies in the contracts, and they knew how to handle changes, and they knew they were actually ready and prepared to escalate those changes within their own businesses amongst the stakeholders when they were required. But sadly, I can say that I only ever had 2 clients who fell into that, who had that kind of description. The reality is CEOs, entrepreneurs think differently to software professionals. They just do. They're different kinds of people, and I think most helpful approach is to really present to these people options that are helpful for them in making their decisions about development. It's telling them what they want to hear is very rarely actually going to be very helpful for the business that they're trying to get off the ground. Mm-hmm. So without the fixed constraint, clients they become more free thinking. Given that software development is mostly problem solving, it's important to keep an open mind and keep your options open without sacrificing your vision. So when that means that on the fly during the project, Fred, you're able to reprioritize your spend. So you may discover, even though the client has asked for this feature or capability, you begin to implement it. They have a revision point. They see that it's just not what they were hoping for, and they realize, our end product users they probably will want to use this feature slightly differently. So when you're not working in that fixed way, you can adapt on the move, and you can say, we'll stop spending there and we'll dedicate the money to implementing that feature correctly.
It kind of makes me think of that's how you run a business. Right? The market is constantly changing.
Yeah.
You have different things that are happening to you, and then although you don't change really direction, you go through the problems and adjust as needed, and
Of course.
decide where you allocate the resources, and then iterate on how you can best get to the direction you want.
That's right. But in a fixed contract, you just don't have that. You don't have that flexibility.
No, you don't have it.
So so that just means that if you're talking about a fixed price contract, and then you're talking about a different arrangement where you've got that flexibility, you need a project owner who's deeply invested. They need to be the ones who are always preserving their vision, and and if I think about the projects that work best, the ones that are the most affordable, most rewarding for both sides, I think of this analogy where you've got a ballroom dancing couple. The couple can only succeed when they're understanding that there's more that's required of them than simply their own movements. They need to accommodate those changes and adapt in the moment during the dance, to make all the movements together feel seamless. And when that happens, the collaboration delivers this kind of magic that makes for something that's really authentic and compelling. And you go, well, Nigel, what on earth does that have to do with software? Well, I'm glad you asked. Um, there's function and then there's emotion.
Yeah.
Regardless of what your project needs are, a software has an experience. Software has an experience. Users have an experience of a product, and they're far more likely to remain loyal to your product and enjoy
Yeah.
using the application when they find that experience authentic and compelling.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 I think.
No,
Thank
but
you,
that was really
thank you to
well
the
said.
audience. I've gone on a long time. I'm sorry. I hope that makes sense, and I hope it's
It does.
helpful.
I
There's
think it does. Yeah.
necessary questions that I've got to ask Fred, which are going to provide another perspective, which is also very helpful. And so talking about your business, Fred,
Yeah.
do Arcanys ever work on fixed price projects?
I mean, not anymore.
Okay, so there was a time when you did fixed price contracts, but now you've moved on.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And the reasons are they're multiple, but basically the one of the reasons was the relationship with the clients were always really difficult because all the expectations that you mentioned earlier. And then we realized that it was also kind of always a suboptimal uh, result in terms of being constrained doesn't let both the client and us provide the best solution and be flexible enough to I mean to give this the result. And also I think it's also a bit of the nature, because of the nature of the company, the size of the projects that come to us where clients want really fixed cost project. When we were starting as a small company, they were really small projects with people that were not well versed into software development. So we also had to really do a lot of training for the clients and things like that. So it was really difficult for us to actually keep on running like that. So over the last 10 years, we've evolved and we've actually focused on working with founder-led companies that run on software, needing us to build teams for them on the long run. And so that's for us the true essence of a software development company. You build software, you build teams, um, and we didn't want to build a website or a small applications agency, but a really true software development company that will, go along with the clients over the years with our experts, so developers, designers, QA people, architects, and business analysts and project managers. And we also prefer to work with founder or owner-led companies. As you described earlier, like as they run businesses, they understand that the project is, especially the ones on which the company is running, right? The software on which the company is running, they understand that it has to change and be flexible as the business go.
You're talking about it's not simply a project. It becomes a living, breathing business system that's
Yeah,
integral to them running their business.
yeah, right. So yeah, exactly. The people we're working in is we're working with we're talking about founders, and we're talking from founders to founders
Right.
or owners
Yeah.
who have the same values, willing to succeed and understand the entrepreneurial risk of building great software that maybe has never been done before, because each business is different, right?
Yeah,
So there
of course.
you can't know where you're going and come up with a fixed price project for something that's evolving. So what we do is we work on this real long term partnership
Okay.
than a simple, one shot provider client relationship on a short project. I'm not saying that smaller fixed price projects, when they're well defined, can't be worked on, but it's just not the nature of our business model anymore.
Okay. Okay. So then the next obvious question is with yeah, do you still think there is a place for fixed price contracts in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they work in a very restricted kind of setup, and it's difficult to meet all the criteria. But some companies really manage to do that, and it's usually for like very well-defined projects that are not so big in scale. Because the bigger the project becomes, the harder it is to maintain this fixed price uh, cost because of all the everything that's happening in the project. So for a fixed price project to work really well, you have to have a lot of work that has been put up front to actually precisely define all the fixed requirements, and as you mentioned earlier, that no doubt is left, right? So it's a lengthy process before starting. So in these projects, um, it's failing to prepare is actually preparing to fail. That's very important. And so this preparation has to be done either by the client, which means he understands, the technological and functional aspects of the project, or by the provider, so where they work together as a partnership with the client to help them better define what's needed. And and then once this is done, the client has to understand that he cannot change his mind throughout the project. And and okay, a lot of times the fault in scope creep during the project falls onto the supplier, because the people on the project don't know how to say no to the demands of the clients,
Right.
which derail the project. So even sometimes when the scope is fixed, clients will come, as you mentioned earlier, like they will try to talk to the team and say, oh, but just add this and that. And,
Yeah.
and so they think it's a small thing. And then
Yeah.
when they talk directly to the devs, which shouldn't really happen in a fixed cost project,
No.
then the developers on the client side or the project managers will try to, make the client happy, and just like do this little additional thing and
Yeah.
stuff, especially if the client's really pushing it. But then it's completely derailing the project, right?
Yeah.
And so it's adding
Yeah.
risks and risks and risks.
Yeah.
So the client and the provider have to be very disciplined.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And that's that tension. You want to be
yeah,
flexible. You want to always do what you can to give people what they want. But if you are working within very clear, you know,
yeah.
clear lines of delineation, it's very difficult. Yeah.
So what happens is usually is like, in this case, is the client is going to ask uh, the owners or whatever, if they can add a bunch of things in the project, just those small things, and then the management will say no, and then it's creating frustration on the client side, and then the client might go around and then go directly ask the team to add some stuff, which they might actually do. And then when the management discovers that the project is off track because they've added some stuff that the client has requested, then it's creating even tension within the company. So there's so many risks for things to go wrong, and then of course it's going to go back between the management and the client, and then sours the relationship. So the provider has to be transparent about all the risks they've been able to identify about the complexity of the project and how the project should run. So like, don't go ask for additional requirements because blah blah blah. And then the provider should also not underestimate the project to win the bidding, because if they do so, like they undercut the price to get the project, at some point they will have to cut corners, if they want to deliver all the features plus the small ones that the client might be asking. So we know that the projects always take slightly more time than initially planned, regardless. Yeah, there's a lot of things that have to go for a fixed price project to go right. And so we talked about these lower chances of success of fixed price projects for all the reasons I've mentioned above. And to go back to the title, of this episode, maybe you could tell us why, even if the project is deemed a success, it still always kind of
Disappointing.
disappoints.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um, I feel like we're kind of rehashing a lot of the same things again and again. But look, in the most simple terms, it's when, it's not if your project is going to hit some significant challenge. Um, you're going to need to have some wiggle room to renegotiate cost areas, or your project is going to suffer.
mm,
That's the reality. So, um, um, keeping that flexibility is absolutely key to minimizing, I think actually eliminating disappointment in a lot of ways, because it's like you say, um, in the scenario where you've got a fixed price project and it's deemed a success because it remained on project, the question then becomes, well, what was the real cost? And
yeah,
it may be that the relationship um, uh, broke down. It may be that that there were all these additional um, phases that actually needed to be done and absorbed somehow, and that actually just led to huge disappointment from the supplier side, because they thought that they were working on the basis that the client would be very reasonable, or maybe be willing to discuss what we do for these change requests that come. So I really feel like the disappointment is often felt on the client side in terms of they meet budget, but the software just isn't what they had hoped it would be. Or even worse, in a lot of ways, is um, you disappointment comes when the deliverable date gets pushed out, and that means that your competitor gets to market faster than you do, and so that is a hugely disappointing experience. On the developer side, it's developers and technical people love to sign off on projects where they go, great, yep, we're implementing these things, these capabilities, these visions. We're bringing to life these great ideas. And when that's compromised because there is no flexibility in the project,
mhm,
software developers end up disappointed. The process, like morale drops. There's all sorts of things that can be felt as disappointments. So, like, um, you would have to be a pretty brave person to say, the fixed price contract was a great success simply because it came in on budget. You know,
yeah,
um, look, if I revisit the ballroom dancer analogy, I would simply say that, like, the fixed price contracts are like those dancers. They're agreeing to collaborate and pull off a great performance, but simply due to the constraints felt by each of them as individuals over time, instead of them being like this, they eventually come apart, and they become focused on their their individual movements. And when that happens, the magic gets
yeah,
lost. The magic gets lost. The software isn't as good. The business hurts. All those sorts of things. So if you're hell bent on, I think really what I'm saying to our audience is, if you are so focused on your project being fixed priced as being the thing that is going to deliver satisfaction
yeah.
to your business, and building a successful collaboration partnership going forward, you might want to rethink that, because it's very unlikely.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. I really love the dancer's analogy. I think it's just so true. It can work, but the magic often gets lost, and it's kind of a one shot dance. Uh, yeah, that might not ever happen again.
Mm.
So. Yeah. So thanks a lot for that. Did you have any other final thoughts about this topic that we had today? Um,
I think I've said way too much probably, but I'm excited to look at our next podcast topic, which I think is going to be the thing that really helps a lot of people out there
yeah,
consider
yeah,
a really workable scenario, a scenario that does lead to success, a scenario that does produce the magic. And so, yeah, I'm excited about doing that podcast with you very soon.
yeah, cool. Yeah, exactly. So I invite you guys, the audience, to meet us in the next episode, which we're really excited about, actually, and we're going to talk about finally the open-ended contracts and how building predictability can mitigate risks. So feel free to send us an email at fred@arcanys.com if you have any questions on this episode or the previous one that you might have listened or that you could go listen on our channel. And other than that, until next time for episode number 3. So thanks a lot, Nigel,
Fantastic.
for being here with me today,
Yeah,
and
pleasure.
we'll see you soon again.
Fantastic. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.